What is up, champs? And welcome to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Presents the Short Shifts podcast. I am your host, Ben Burnett. Joining me, as always, Lewis E. Ezekiel, and the E is for Ennis, Tyler is ruining your life. Lewis, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. It has been kind of depressing with Tyler Ennis going off against me this week. It's a weird week. I'm in a bad spot. I think I'm just going to write it off and get ready for next time.
It is a weird week. It's a bad week. I have to say, this is like the first week where I'm just getting absolutely stomped in the cupful. I'm down 30 already, and there's like 5 or 6 days to go. I had originally made plans for a midweek ad and a weekend ad. I think I'm just going to abandon ship at this point and move on.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think at least you and I and Elon are suffering some rough weeks. We've had several weeks where all 4 of the Keeping Karlsson podcasters were winning all their matches, but this is not one of them. It's just not meant to be. It's
regression, I think, is the term.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, let's get into it, Lewis. It is the Tuesday after the All-Star weekend, so, coming into this morning, we were like, oh, God, are there any headlines? And after a few hours, I will have to say there are several headlines that we need to get to today, starting in Buffalo, where I just watched a video clip of Linus Ullmark going down with an apparent right leg injury. Looked really bad. He kind of tripped in the crease, and he went down hard with his leg bent back. He needed to be helped off of the ice. It's with a very heavy heart that I ask this, Lewis. Is it Carter Hutton season?
In so much as it's likely that Carter Hutton will be starting at least the next few games for Buffalo, then yes, it is Carter Hutton season. If you're talking about, is it time to rush to the waiver wire to add Carter Hutton, I'm not so sure that that is the case.
I would agree with you. I don't have a lot of faith in Carter Hutton's existence producing worthwhile fantasy goaltending.
So, I'm down on the idea of Carter Hutton, but it's not like Buffalo has been a terrible place to be a goaltender lately, at least not for Ullmark, right?
Yeah, Ullmark, 4 straight starts with an above 920, and 3 of those games were wins. Somehow he lost 2-1 to Nashville, which is virtually unthinkable at this point in the NHL season. A bit of a tougher go so far tonight, but he had 30 saves on 33 shots, so you hate to see it. I would have to imagine that he's going to miss a few weeks. I'm disappointed to see Ullmark go down for a few weeks. Neither of us are excited about Carter Hutton. Do we think it could be Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's time to get called up and force hundreds of fantasy analysts to learn a very K-filled name?
Well, that was a pretty impressive rendition. I hope it was accurate, because if you stuck the landing, that's really outstanding. I would love to see it, just because this has been such a season of these who-dat goalies coming up and making an impact. And obviously this is a guy that, there's some buzz around and that Buffalo fans are excited for and hoping that he'll make an impact down the line. I don't know if this is necessarily the best situation for a new goalie coming in, but we probably would have said that about Columbus too. I think they're certainly capable of more stifling defensive play than Buffalo is. But, if Ullmark has been able to be successful, maybe, what's that first name?
Ukko.
Maybe Ukko can be as well. It would be really interesting to see. I think just for the interest of fantasy owners, dynasty owners especially, around the globe, give Ukko a chance. Get Carter Hutton. He's had his shot.
Yes, I hope to God that we're pronouncing Ukko's first name right. We'll find out quickly. If not, though, I'm sure that folks will let us know. From a fresh injury in Buffalo over to a hopefully ouchery in the near future, was reading the Dauber Ramblings this morning, and it mentioned that a St. Louis Blues beat writer asked Vladimir Tarasenko if he would be back mid-March as per the report from his original injury timeline, and he said that he will be back sooner than mid-March. To quote the Dauber Ramblings piece, if Tarasenko thinks he can be back sooner than mid-March, that means fantasy owners can probably still get a month of usage out of him. How effective he'll be returning from a 4 or 5 month absence as teams are grinding for the playoffs is another question. So I'm curious, Lewis, what do we think of this report? Do we think we'll see Tank back during the fantasy season? And who would benefit if he does return?
So That's a really interesting one. I think it would be obviously great for the Blues if they could get him back. He's a stalwart. They've had some great depth step up. David Perron obviously is having an outstanding season. Alex Steen has been really productive lately. I believe he has a goal here on Tuesday evening.
He does, yeah.
It's been really good, obviously, for the Blues to show that they can survive with Tank on the shelf. I guess the only question about his effectiveness after return from an absence, if he's skating already, won't be conditioning, but rather, how strong he feels in his shoulder. Can he take a hit? Can he shoot the way that, he has been in the past? I'm no doctor. I can't answer that question, but I do think that, since it's not a leg injury, since it's not something that's going to interfere too much with his conditioning, I think he might be able to, if he's feeling good and feeling confident, come back and make a real impact. To me, this seems like if you are in a one-year league, this would be the time to go out and potentially make an offer before people catch up on this particular bit of news. What do you think?
Yeah, I wonder if you would be sounding the alarm if somebody were to see your offer and think, oh, maybe I should go check it out. You might have to trick someone into offering him to you, maybe. But I think that personally, I think that he's probably being a little optimistic, would be my assumption. Like, of course he wants to come back. He's a competitor. He wants to play this year. He wants to get back in time to be ready for the playoffs, I'm sure. I am not going to get my hopes up until we see an actual report from the team that they're looking at him coming back.
And as we mentioned on the last episode of Short Shifts, I think there is some concern that the Blues may go the more conservative route since they are, likely secured in their playoff spot. Why, risk potentially re-injury for one of their stars when they can hold on to him for the playoffs? You brought that up, and I thought that was a really good point. But, are they going to be able to take a healthy Tarasenko and tell him basically, no, stay off the ice? Yes, probably they could, but I don't know how thrilled he would be about that idea. It'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds.
Right. And so my assumption would be this would be a huge boost for Jaden Schwartz and Braden Shen, who I think Tarasenko fits in right on that right side. Likely, in my opinion, you would keep the O'Reilly-Perron pairing together, and then maybe you give Robert Thomas a chance on that second line wing spot. Put Bozak back in the 3C. I think that could be a really nice boost to the entire top six to have Tarasenko back to pull defensive schemes away from that second line and give all of these guys an opportunity to have a little bit more offensive output.
Yeah, Schwartz has been kind of keeping that top line relevant with some pretty unsustainable production. So it's obviously great to see. But I think, yes, having Tarasenko there to, provide another great option on the first line. It's kind of been a carousel of lesser wingers up there. Obviously, getting their true superstar back on the top line would be fantastic. And the Schwartz-Shen, it has positive impact, I think, at least up through the top six.
Yes. Let's talk one more outjury here. I want to talk about Kyle Palmieri back in the Devils lineup on Monday in a 4-3 overtime win over Ottawa. Palmieri slotted right back up on that first line with Jesper Bratt and Nico Hischier. Palmieri and Hischier have actually been pretty great together since Taylor Hall's departure. Palmieri's missed some time, but he does have 13 points in 14 games since Hall came out of the lineup ahead of his trade, while Hischier has 14 points in 18 games. He has not missed time. The two seem to be meshing pretty well despite the absence of a superstar on their line. What do we think about Hischier, Palmieri, or any of these other depth pieces in New Jersey with a more healthy lineup moving forward?
Do you think there are listeners in New Jersey who are howling over us declaring that their number one overall pick may not be a superstar?
I mean, he clearly isn't this year.
No, you're right. Absolutely. And he has been doing an admirable job of staying afloat with Hall gone. New Jersey would be foolish to not get something for Palmieri. I believe our last episode you talked a little bit about some interest from Boston. I think for Palmieri owners, they would be pretty excited to see him lined up next to someone like David Krejci on the second line. But would he be more successful than he's been with Hischier here? It's hard to say. He's been, I think, maybe scraping his ceiling in terms of his productive capability at this point.
Yeah, I would say that it would be a downgrade for Palmieri to move just because you're not going to see him get top line, top power play deployment in Boston. Nice as it would be to play alongside David Krejci, who Brian and Elon mentioned has been very consistently excellent on the most recent Keeping Karlsson episode.
Obviously great to see Palmieri come back and score a goal. It was interesting to see that Jack Hughes was relegated to third-line duties with Wayne Simmons and Pavel Zacha. Sure seems like we are a year away at least from the real arrival of Jack Hughes, right?
I totally agree with you. I did notice that Jack Hughes had 8 shots last night in Ottawa. An interesting development. At least he's taking his shots. If he can start to convert, maybe it becomes interesting. But I'm definitely not getting my hopes up until I start seeing the points going into the column. One more headline here before we get into our final segment, Lewis. I wanted to chat about Jakub Vrana in Washington. He's been on fire lately. 11 points in his last 9 games. Now on pace for 69 points this season. What do we think about somebody who has been unable to claw his way out of the middle 6 in Washington? Is Vrana sustainable or fleeting?
So as you mentioned, he's on a nice hot streak right now. The 23-year-old is in the midst of his breakout threshold. This was a term introduced in this year's Dobber Hockey Guide to replace the concept of the 4th-year breakout. I think Dobber was kind of struggling with some of the issues of players who were in their 4th year, but maybe they had missed some games due to injury, that sort of thing. The idea basically is that beginning around 200 games, average size forwards start to make a big leap forward. They have their feet under them. They're used to the speed of the NHL game, and they begin to make major progress with regard to developing their scoring acumen. If you believe this or not, Vrana is making the most of these opportunities available to him while he is, climbing up into his 200s of games. Compared to the first half of the season, the 7 games so far of quarter 3 show over a minute of additional ice time, and his power play time on ice nearly doubling to over 3 minutes per game. This is over a pretty limited sample size of just 7 games, but it is worth noting that this could become the new sort of standard for Vrana moving forward. Even still, only 3 of his 11 points on this current streak are power play points, and he's got just 1 power play goal this season with 22 at even strength. And he's really using this extra time on ice to good effect, averaging over 3 shots a game during this 9-game streak.
Well, so I think the interesting thing with Vrana right now is that he seems to have jumped over Evgeny Kuznetsov in the power play option
pecking order?
I guess, yeah. He seems to have jumped over Evgeny Kuznetsov in the pecking order for power play time on ice the last couple of weeks. Washington's been a little bit disorganized with their usage. It seems like they're willing to send out some mix and match lines on the power play, but more often than not, Vrana has started with the top unit of TJ Oshie, Backstrom, Ovechkin, and Karlsson, and they've been pretty effective. As you said, they've been able to put up some points. So I think the main question here for someone like Vrana, who's been able to score at even strength, as you said, he's ranked 3rd in the league, in fact, in even strength goals. I think the question here is whether or not we think that he can outpace Evgeny Kuznetsov in power play time on ice the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think that's a big open-ended question and really interesting. Obviously, he's been extremely productive at even strength, so if he could get into more of these power play points, that could really rise him to kind of elite status. There are some warning signs that I think we need to watch out for. The biggest one is that he's scored on nearly 1/3 of those shots that he's taken over the last 9 games. We certainly can't expect Vrana to continue to score on 8 of every 27 shots, and he has nearly 3/4 of an extra goal per 60 more minutes over his expected rate. And he's got a pretty high on-ice shooting percentage at 12.42. It's worth noting it was pretty high last year also, 11+%. And it might be the kind of thing that you would expect when you're spending more time with Kuznetsov and Backstrom and shooting percentage legend TJ Oshie and less time with Lars Eller and Garnet Hathaway. Still something that is likely to regress.
Well, and the other thing there, Lewis, about his on-ice shooting percentage is that if he's going to go out and get a bunch more power play time on ice over the last 40 games, that could really alleviate some of the loss when he inevitably regresses back down to around a 9.5 or 10% on-ice shooting percentage.
Yeah, absolutely. When you've got Ovechkin bombing from that circle, that's going to help you keep those on-ice shooting percentages up in that higher region. And, Vrana also has raised his assist rate, and his IPP isn't excessive for a forward, so I think those points will continue to come, even if he doesn't maintain his pace in terms of goal scoring. So overall, I don't think he's going to score at his recent 100-point pace that he has over these last 9 games, but a boost to his power play time and his even strength time on ice with more consistent top 6 deployment should have him pacing above his first half average of 65 points too. So I like him to continue to show some improvement over his current pace and end up between a 70 and 75 point pace for the rest of the year. I'm a little nervous just because that power play time role is a bit up in the air. It could just as easily go back to Kuznetsov, but what do you think? I think he'll all but certainly smash his career numbers, but can he pace for 70 plus for the remainder of the year?
I would lean towards no. I think he's more of a 60 to 65 point guy, but this really is one of those things where it depends on whether or not he can hold on to that power play time on ice. Vrana was someone I kind of saw as a regression candidate in the second half, but those power play time on ice totals are nothing to joke about. And honestly, when you look at the amount of time that he spent on the ice from last year to this year, there's not that big of a difference, except in the fact that he's getting a lot more time on the power play. So that's a spot where I could see him getting up into the 70-point range, but he would need to have really excellent deployment to get him there. And I'm not yet ready to say that Kuznetsov is going to stay off the top unit for the rest of the season. I mean, maybe they go with a bit of a mix and match approach, and maybe Tom Wilson gets some time up there, maybe Vrana, maybe Kuznetsov, maybe they cycle Oshie out of his spot. I don't really know what they're going to do in that sense, but I think that for him to get up above 70%, he would need to be on the top power play rest of the season.
Yeah, it definitely will be interesting to see how Vrana continues to progress throughout the course of the year. He's been someone who's been really interesting. I think a lot of people have sort of been waiting for him to sort of break through into that power play 1 position and really grab it and hold on to it. Obviously, with so much talent in Washington, they have plenty of options up there. So it's not like he is going to feel secure about his position there for the next while here. But absolutely, he's showing us that he can be a very productive forward. I think Dauber had him predicted for about 52 points this year. He's going to have that. Oh, he only needs 11 points to break that prediction, and I think he will cruise right past it and on to setting some pretty impressive new career totals for him.
All right, well, Lewis, let's get into our last segment of today's show. We are going to chat about a couple of goaltending situations, and we are going to say who we think has grabbed the reins in the starter's net. Lewis, you are going to introduce our tandems, and then we are both going to discuss who we think is in the number 1 spot. Why don't you start us off here?
All right, a fun opportunity to play some pick your goalie poison. I hope that we can provide you with some useful fantasy advice as you are struggling, like all fantasy owners, with trying to deal with these wild back and forth goalie tandem races. Talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins, they don't play again until Friday, so unfortunately Short Shifts is going to have very limited info for you this week. But Matt Murray has 4 quality starts in his last 5, all 5 over 900 save percentage, all wins. And he's staging quite the comeback against Tristan Jarry, whose last 5 has featured only 2 quality starts, although he has managed to get 3 wins. I'm really interested to see who is going to start on Friday. I think a lot of people who managed to pick up Jarry or who, grabbed Murray when his price was low are also going to be anxiously looking forward to see who grabs that start. Hopefully by the time you're listening to the Sunday podcast, there will be more information out there. The Penguins will have played twice by then, so we should have a clear idea of how this goalie race is setting up. Do you have a preference between these two? Do you feel like one of them is more likely to grab the reins than the other?
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's Jarry right now. You can say however many wins either of them has, but we're talking about a team that's been incredible this year. So goalie wins as a statistic is often useful because it'll tell you maybe which way the coach favors them. But I don't think that in this case it's really being predictive about which one has been stronger. I think it's still Jarry until we start to see Matt Murray actually wrestle the net back. He really has not, had a string of starts together where he's been able to be in net. And until we see, 3-4 starts in a row, I think it's still Tristan Jarry.
All right, well, that's optimistic for myself as a Jarry owner, so I choose to believe it because it makes me feel better. Let's jump on to one that is a little more competitive and active right now. An interesting one in Washington. It seems like Coach Reardon really wants to make Holtby happen. He got the first start after the All-Star game despite starting in the All-Star game over Ilya Samsonov. And he played quite well in a 4-2 win over the Canadiens without Alex Ovechkin on Monday. This was his first 900-plus appearance since December 21st, if you can believe it. Holtby is also scheduled to play Wednesday versus Nashville, and Samsonov draws Friday's match versus Ottawa. Samsonov still possesses far superior numbers across all categories, but my prediction about him starting 2 of every 3 games for the second half is starting to look a little shaky here. What is your prognosis on this battle?
I think this reminds me quite a bit about the Cam Talbot hype of 2019, where he looks like he was going to be stealing some starts and becoming the number 1 in Calgary. And then as soon as David Riddick had a good start, they were like, see, he's our guy. I think that the Caps still look at Braden Holtby as their guy. Ilya Samsonov in interviews recently was referring to Holtby as the starter. I think that this is pretty normal stuff. I do think, in a keeper league, Samsonov is almost definitely going to be the starter in September, in October next year. But for now, they still view Holtby as the guy, regardless of, whatever fancy stats we have that show us that Samsonov has been the stronger netminder.
Yeah, and even the not-so-exciting fancy stats have shown, obviously, that Samsonov has been capable of stringing together some wins in a way that Holtby has really struggled to, but a chance to go out there on Wednesday and secure a win versus Nashville, and I think that does put the ball maybe back in Holtby's court. It's amazing what having won a cup with a team will do for you. It buys you quite a lot of opportunity, although maybe Matt Murray is listening to this podcast and screaming at me that he's won 2 and he can't seem to get any darn respect. So I don't know if maybe I'm way off on that comment.
Well, I think that part of it is the cup win, and the other part of it is the uncertainty of having a rookie goaltender in net in Washington. I'm not going to assume that the thought process between Jarry and Murray is the same as Holtby and Samsonov.
Yeah, great point. All right, let's head to our defending Stanley Cup champions, the St. Louis Blues, who have a bit of a goalie controversy here, although it may be sorting itself out somewhat. So Jake Allen has just 1 sub-900 game in his last 8 starts, and has twice taken over for Binnington, who was pulled from the net recently. He did lose to Vancouver on Monday night, but did put up a respectable .920 save percentage and continues to appear to be quite a reliable option relative to Binnington, who has, over his last 6 starts, 3 quality starts and 3 really bad starts in his last 6 games. Do you think that the edge is in Allen's favor here in the short term, considering his success recently?
No. I actually disagree with the concept of a controversy in St. Louis. I do not think that the Blues are in any way thinking about Jake Allen as their starter. As fantasy analysts, I think that we can often get caught up in the minutia of very small sample sizes where we're looking at, there's 4 games right now where one player was good and the other was bad in their last 2. So therefore they're making these big lineup altering changes. But honestly, or as good as Jake Allen has been this year, he was much, much worse last year. I think that him being successful in a backup role says to the St. Louis Blues that he can be good in a backup role. I don't think it says to them, now we can put him back in the starter's crease and depend on him. Binnington, a guy who just won them a cup, in a way that Matt Murray really, I don't think, did in Pittsburgh. His second year in particular, he really only played in the cup final. Obviously, he had a great run the first year. that they are in his first year where they won that cup in 2016, but it's been a while where he's really carried that team. I think that in St. Louis, and they mentioned this on the Megapod on Sunday, Brian and Elon I agree with their take. I think it's Binnington's net still. I think it would take a lot more than, the last couple months to shake him out of there.
Yeah, I think you make a great observation. Obviously, Binnington put that whole team on his shoulders in the 2018-2019 season and carried them quite a long way in a way that, Matt Murray really wasn't asked to in, his cup seasons, I should say. And I think that memory of what Jake Allen has done to the Blues in the past. I mean, the reason they were down there in the bottom of the standings was in large part because Jake Allen was such a disaster. And I think you're absolutely right. I think a good spot for Allen to play is as a backup here. There was a lot of talk that, finally Allen was going to get the net to himself a couple seasons ago and he wasn't going to have to look over his shoulder. And this was going to be the dawning of, the Jake Allen being as successful as he had ever been. And it turned out that the opposite was true. It was really a disaster. So maybe this is the perfect spot to Allen be, to come and be a very competent backup goalie for his team, but not to take on that firm number one spot.
Yeah, I think it's just an important thing to remember that, backup goaltenders performing well doesn't always mean to the coach, now this guy needs to get three quarters of our starts. It often could just mean, I'm glad that we have those 25% locked down, and now our starter just needs to get his game in line. And I would assume that that's where the Blues are at personally.
Yeah, and it seems like the Caps may be in that exact same situation as well.
Sure, yeah, that's a good point. We've talked about the Caps having given the reins up to Grubauer at the end of the season when they won the Cup in 2017. That was under Barry Trotz, though. I mean, I wonder if this is a Todd Reirden situation where he's not comfortable giving up on Braden Holtby. It was a different coach who ended up handing over the reins. Maybe I'm just looking too deep into the tea leaves here, though.
Maybe. I think I'm getting caught up too much in the hype, so I think we're balancing each other out pretty well. I badly want Samsonov in there. I feel like he's doing such a great job, but I totally understand where you're coming from. The coach's comfort level, certainly, this plays a big role. He's got to go with the person that he feels like he can trust. And just because, we're looking at the results on the ice as fantasy owners, that doesn't mean that the coach isn't seeing something different day in and day out in practice and that sort of thing. Let's head over to the West Coast and take a look at the goalie tandem in San Jose. Aaron Dell continues to roll. He's had a .929 or above in 3 wins in the last 5 games, just below .900 in the 2 losses. Jones has had 2 starts in the last 10. Both were sub .900 losses, including a really bad start at .828. Dell seems like he should be firmly in the number 1 spot, but it does appear that Jones will start Wednesday's game. Dell had a fine game on Monday, defeating the Anaheim Ducks 4-2, but it is going to be Jones' next game on Wednesday night against Vancouver, possibly since Dell surrendered 4 goals to them in their last meeting. How do you think this shakes out? Is Dell the guy here? Are they going to see 50-50 time if Jones can be competent at all? How do you see this playing out in San Jose?
Yeah, I think it's Dell for the medium term at this point. I think he's played his way into that position, and he's been more or less a league average goalie now over the course of the year. You cannot say the same thing about Martin Jones. So yeah, I think it's Dell until further notice. Absolutely. Lewis, that's all the time we have for tonight. For myself, Ben Burnett, I'm signing on out of here. Why don't you take us home?
All right. Want to acknowledge Natural Stat Trick and Fantrax for helping with research today. If you are interested in interacting with us online, please give us a follow at Average Time or at AVG Time on Ice. You also can become a patron of Keeping Karlsson at keepingkarlsson.com/patron and join the patron-only Facebook group. It also gives you access to the Cupful, a giant multi-layer, multi-tier fantasy league, which is a ton of fun, by far the most competitive league I've ever participated in. Our buddies and super patrons, Ryan and Marcus, are running the Cigar League now, which is Can I Get a Redo, which gives you the opportunity to redraft your team at the midpoint of the season and compete for the rest of the year. They're having great fun with that. So lots of great opportunities to get more involved in the Keeping Karlsson community. As for myself and Ben, we will see you on Friday morning. Looking forward to seeing some more games as this weird week comes to its conclusion. And until it does, make sure that you play smart and keep your shifts short.